Okay, Roberta's here.
Hello.
Hi, Roberta.
So, welcome thank you for tuning in to this, the first webinar produced by the Ukama Mission Group.
Okay. We are David, who is the chairman of the Ukama Mission Group, and Richard, who is the coordinator of Ukama. And we're glad that you are a part of our Ukama relationship that now has celebrated 20 years of life, and about 47 of our churches are partnered.
So let's get connected. The purposes of this webinar are threefold. First of all, we're looking for a virtual way to get more connected among the people who are associated with Ukama here in the New Hampshire Conference. Specifically today, we want to review some opportunities and the challenges involved in providing financial support to ministries associated with the United Church of Christ of Zimbabwe. And at the end of the webinar today, we will be sharing some news about supporting the relief efforts in the wake of Cyclone Idai. My picture still won't come up, but there you are.
There should have been a picture of David, and the picture on the left is of me with Reverend Ngozi Ori at his home when we visited in June of 2017.
And the picture that I think you can't see is of me with Reverend Mpofu, who's the pastor of the Iveen Church in Gweru, with which South Dewberry Church is partnered.
Right, and he's very camera shy.
Yeah. Let us pray.
Loving God, we thank you for calling us into relationship with your people and for the opportunities that are available to us, not only through modern travel, but through electronic connections, so that we are able to stay in touch with our friends, our family in Zimbabwe. Be with them, we pray, during this time as they seek to find ways to recuperate from damage that's been done to their country. Be with those who grieve the loss of loved ones, family members. We hold them in our hearts. Loving God, we ask that you would hold them in your heart as well. For we pray in our Savior's name, amen.
We thought it was a good idea to do a little bit of review about the whole concept of Ukama before we get into the details of giving. It's important that we remember that Ukama is a partnership, not a mission. The old mission model was worked on an understanding that people in the global north had something to offer to less advantaged, less developed people in the global south. That model has pretty much gone by the wayside for a lot of global north mainline churches. Now we understand that both partners have assets and both partners have needs. And if you think about it for a moment, while the people in the United Church of Christ of Zimbabwe have economic needs, they also have abundant spiritual and relational assets which have blessed us richly over the course of this relationship.
And I would just add that the covenant that was developed between the UCCZ and the New Hampshire Conference was a real collaboration. It came about as a result of several meetings between leaders of our denomination and the UCCZ. So the covenant is itself a result of the work together in partnership.
And any opportunities for giving are always done in consultation with and at the wishes of the leadership in the United Church of Christ in Zimbabwe. We don't make up ideas for giving within the Ukama relationship. We let them know that we're willing to help, and we listen to what they say they need, and we'll get into that in a little more detail later in this webinar. There are policies for giving. You may find on the New Hampshire Conference website, the Ukama page, there is a Ways to Give statement, which was revised in 2017, and it's worth your while to print that out and to make use of it wherever you're making a decision about giving, and to see how that policy informs the way that we give. And just a reminder that if you are an Ukama church, one of the things that happened when you formalized the covenant was you agreed to give according to this this policy.
So in the policy, which, as David said, you'll find on our website, there are a number of ways in which we can support our relationship. Perhaps the most common is the church-to-church gift. In the course of our partnership, we develop ways of communicating. We were talking informally before the webinar began about WhatsApp. WhatsApp is one of those ways in which we regularly communicate. Another way is through email. And some of our congregations here and there have been using Skype or other online platforms to have conversations with their partners, some say on a Sunday morning or sometime like that. And in the course of those conversations, we learn about their needs. And one of the challenges that the Ukama Partnership faces is not allowing our partnership to become a project that we try to fund, but to allow it to continue to be a partnership. And two is to give in a way that honors the partnership. And so they've developed the by now well-known 80-10-10 arrangement, where 80% of a gift that you give to your partnership goes to that church directly. 10% goes to non-partner churches, so that they're not totally left out of the picture. 10% goes to administration and oversight and monitoring of the whatever project it is that might be undertaken. So that is kind of the essence of the church-to-church gift.
Within the United Church of Christ of Zimbabwe as an entire denomination, there have been standing around for some years 3 funds that the denomination uses to disperse to situations in need. And those 3 funds are described on that Opportunities for Giving document on the webpage. The first one is a local church construction grant fund. So this goes to the denomination and is distributed to churches that are involved in building, whether or not they are directly partnered. So you may give to your local church because it's involved in a building project, but this fund supports a variety of building projects where there may be some need. The second fund that's been around for a while is a fund to support orphans and vulnerable children living with AIDS. As you probably know, for quite a long time, the AIDS epidemic was quite rampant in Southern Africa. Fortunately, that has abated somewhat, but there still are a lot of children living with AIDS and children who have been orphaned because their parents have died. And the third fund is the Education Fund, and this provides support for children's school fees to be paid. And again, these monies are held by the denomination and distributed through the 3 conference ministers, and then distributed from there to places where there is known need. And this, again, is one of the signs of one of the great assets of the United Church of Christ of Zimbabwe that I frankly admire myself, and that is the extraordinary amount of connection and awareness of personal situations in churches across the denomination, that how much they know about what's going on in those churches is really quite extraordinary. So Richard already spoke about the church to church and the 80-10-10 rule that that indeed if you give through the Ukama Mission Group of the New Hampshire Conference, that is the rule that is applied. One of the reasons why that's really important is because there's a lot more churches in the United Church of Christ of Zimbabwe that aren't partnered, and it creates a certain equality among the churches to know that there's resources available to churches that are not partnered as well as resources to churches that are. In conversation with the Ukama Committee in Zimbabwe and the Ukama Mission Group here, we determined before the cyclone an appeal for clean water and food security, which is something that we've done in the past. Richard, do you want to unpack that appeal a little bit for us?
There's 7 people at the meeting.
Oh, I thought I heard somebody asking a question. I hope you will feel free
yes,
to
I'm sorry.
yes.
Richard, this is Jenna Sanborn, and I couldn't get in on the computer, and so I just used the phone. So I don't want to. I'll just listen to you to the meeting.
Okay. Well, welcome, Janet. Glad you're here.
Well, thank you. Me too.
So even before the cyclone, but now much more important, has been the need for clean water. And so in partnership with the UCCZ, we've developed a number of what they call boreholes to provide clean water. Most often these are centered on a church campus or school campus. And the first priority is providing water to those institutions. One of the things that we learned when we were in Zimbabwe was that every borehole has a spigot that runs out to the roadside so that people from the village are also able to receive clean water. But clean water is really of vital importance. And the other aspect of that appeal was food security. Zimbabwe's management of its resources has not always been the best, and there continues to be a lack of food supply, particularly for the most vulnerable people, and this is an effort to address that need.
Our Ukama is associated with Common Global Ministries, Common Ministry of the United Church of Christ and the Disciples of Christ. We strongly recommend that you take advantage of this website, which brings you right to the ways that Common Global Ministries is involved in ministry in Zimbabwe. There also is, I think, directly connected to that website, but there's a more direct one related to the cyclone that gives Common Global Ministries updates on response to the cyclone across the region. But through Common Global Ministries, there are a number of ways that we can support efforts to do things in Zimbabwe. Many of us are very familiar with the Daisy Doobie Orphanage at Mount Selinda. That orphanage is a mission of Common Global Ministries and supports 30 children right now?
I believe so. Yes, 30 to 40 children.
Right, and you can give directly to support that work, and you can also, if you look down at the third bullet, child sponsorship, you can specifically support a child either at Daisy Doobie or in the area. Richard, you want to say a little bit about the Crosby Scholarship Fund?
Yes. In collaboration, once again, with the UCCZ and Common Global Ministries, the New Hampshire Conference some years ago established a scholarship fund to honor Benjamin Crosby and the work that he had done in developing the relationship, and to provide support for students from the UCCZ who are interested in training for ministry at United Theological College in Harare. And at the request of the UCCZ, scholarship monies are applied to the cost of study. for these theological students.
And last October, when our guests from Zimbabwe were here, Reverend Mpofu gave a report of a number of students who actually are receiving that assistance, who are members of the United Church of Christ in Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
The Common Global Ministries is also the resource, the means, the conduit for disaster relief. And again, we'll talk about that in some detail when we get to the cyclone story later in this webinar. But you can also, when you go to that website, you will see that there is a donate button, and that donate button allows you to designate a gift. The gifts that we're talking about are all things that come through New Hampshire Conference, but you can give directly through the Common Global Ministries website if you wish. One more thing to just keep in mind is that it costs a lot of money to get from here to there and there to here. And typically we try to send people there every 4 or 5 years and bring people here every 4 or 5 years. And we do hold funds for travel in the New Hampshire Conference. And just to round number, it takes about $3,000 for folk from here to get to there because we cover all the transportation costs once you're in Zimbabwe and provide resources to our hosts because oftentimes they're not in a position to be able to feed and house us with their own resources. So just important to keep that in mind as another way that you really support the ministry, because what all of us who've been around this thing for a long time know is that the ministry is the most meaningful when we have that face-to-face contact.
And I would add, we're hoping in 2020, if circumstances permit, to send a delegation from the New Hampshire Conference to Zimbabwe, both in the summer and then again for the installation of the new president of the UCCZ in the fall.
So here's where we get into a little bit more detail with procedures. How do we get this money? Let's say we want to raise some money and help in one of these ways. How do we get the money to where we want it to go? Well, the first thing is that Ukama funds are supposed to be sent through the New Hampshire Conference, which has the means to hold the funds and to get the funds there at the time they're most useful. And we've learned some things recently about that with regard to the borehole. You want to update us how that we're supposed to hold the money until we can send it directly to the contractor, all that?
Yes.
New insight.
Again, in collaboration with our colleagues in the UCCZ, we first of all, there was a significant break-in and loss of funds at the headquarters of the UCCZ about a year ago, and money that had been gathered there and held there safe for a borehole project was stolen. So we've asked for help in developing a more secure way of getting money there, and the recommendation is that we agree upon a project that we want to support with them. When the project is ready to begin, we receive the information of who the contractor is and a particular kind of checking account that accepts foreign currency and allows it to remain as foreign currency. We get a number of that contractor's foreign currency account, and then we send that money, and that's deposited directly into that contractor's account, and the project then can begin. And the same thing happens when the project is completed. We would send the amount directly in that manner. That's very project specific. It's not yet being used to transfer other kinds of funds.
And another thing that we learned when our friends were here in October is that the inflation that the country was experiencing, if you gave money before it was needed, by the time it was used, in one case it was worth a third as much as the amount that had been originally given because of inflation. So being in very close communication and using the resources of the conference to make sure that when you're sending money, it's about to be used. It's not going to be put into a bank because it's very hard for U.S. currency to be deposited and then come out as U.S. currency, and inflation means that it loses its value. So a word to the wise about all of that. We're very clear that the most effective way to deliver funds is through a person. And one of the things that we invite churches to consider is that if you have some funds, to be in communication with Richard here in the conference office. Hopefully, we're getting news as to when people are traveling to Zimbabwe and whether they are willing to carry funds on behalf of one of our churches for one of the appeals over there.
And it may seem risky to be sending thousands of dollars with travelers, tourists to Zimbabwe. But we actually, to my knowledge, have not lost a single dollar over the 20 years we've been doing that. So,
and one of the ways that that's substantiated is that whenever there's a transfer of money, there's a donor, there's a recipient, there's a witness, and there's receipting that goes on. We had meetings here before our guests left where that process was undertaken. Rather time-consuming, but incredibly effective in making sure that we all knew what was happening. And those of us who've been in Zimbabwe know that that same thing happens at meetings over there when things are passed. So it's good to know that that's part of the process. People have used wire transfers. We are being informed that even before the cyclone, the question as to whether those monies were being transferred in a way that was keeping them in US dollars was iffy at best. So at the current time, unless we've got really hard information that that your recipient is getting the money the way you want the money to be received by them, this is not as dependable of a mechanism as we had hoped it would be. The other thing that's really important, look it up. If you look up Western Union and look up how to give money to Zimbabwe, there's a fairly hefty transfer fee that's involved in that. It's worth taking a look at that before you think of that as a means of sending money. We talked a little bit about that receipting, so there's just the note on how that works.
should we pause just a moment? We've talked a lot, and I'm wondering if there are any questions that you'd like to have us address, or any observations you'd like to make.
I'm encouraged.
This is Janet. Okay, go ahead.
This is Roberta, and I was just encouraged about the way things work, that there is a safe method to get our monies over to them. Although it sounds like banking is a little challenging there.
It continues to be challenging, and it continues to be a situation that varies. What works right now may not be working in a couple of months. So.
Right.
Janet, did you have a question or thought?
Well, I have a thought and a question. I don't know if you know that Connie Littlefield went over on Sunday.
Yes,
and we were able to. Okay, and I was able to provide funding for her in cash, and I appreciate your saying that is a safe way to do it, because I felt like I could trust her with everything, and she was planning to actually hand carry it to Emerald Church, which is our partner church, and part of the money, and the rest was to go to the work that she does over there through Project KZ. Are you aware of that? She has a not-for-profit organization called Project KZ that is working in the Chipinge area.
Yes.
And works with Daisy Doobie Orphanage and everything. So I thought you probably were aware of it, but I came in late, so I wasn't sure if you had mentioned it. And I have appreciated knowing that that there was a way to get money there. And I have an interest in, well, I am supporting a student at Midland State University, and I think I mentioned it earlier. I wasn't sure how the best way for the money to go to Midlands, and I have. He did start in February, and I have been using an account that the mother has through Western Union, and they have a special way called the EchoNet to transfer money. It's like a credit card almost. The money can go through Western Union directly to her phone, and then she transfers it directly to Midland State to pay his bills. And I just was, and I know it's happening because I've got the receipts, but I was just wondering if the conference itself supports individual students in any way, or other than theology students.
Can I just ask, Janet, was this set up through the Ukama Partnership, this support of a theological student, or is this something that was developed?
He's not a theology student. He's going to Midland State University as a freshman.
Yeah.
And when Reverend Mapofu, when he was here, we shared a conversation that he was a chaplain there. So through Reverend Mapofu and the mother of the student, who she came to know, and through Reverend Matavunye, they all have guided this one person to be a student at Midland State University. And I couldn't have done it without the two of those people that I've met before, and they just told me how to do it. But financially for me, it would be better if I could get some kind of a deduction for supporting a student. And so I was just wondering if there was if the New Hampshire Conference was supporting education or of other students other than through the theology, Ben Crosby's.
Okay, so Jan, let me speak to this.
Okay, please.
The CK organization that Connie Littlefield is part of is not part of Ukama. The container shipment that has gone over a number of years is not part of Ukama.
Okay.
So one of the things that's what I want to say, a complicated clarification, is that there are things that are under the Ukama covenant, and then there are things that are not. And so, for instance, if you wanted to provide for that student's education in Ukama, you would send through that education fund that's under Ways to Give on the website. That would go to go through the New Hampshire Conference to the Synod office, and whether they would be able to direct those funds directly to that student is something that we can't answer. But that's the only way that the conference is going to acknowledge this support, is things that are directly related to Ukama. There are dozens of nonprofits and NGOs over there that do very good work, but because Ukama is a partnership between UCCZ and New Hampshire Conference, we don't get involved directly in supporting any of those NGOs, just ministries related to UCCZ.
Okay, so do you know if it's possible to have to sponsor a student to the UCCZ?
No.
A particular student, or is it just like a scholarship for any student to go someplace that
Usually
they select?
the monies in the education fund, as I understand them, as we understand them in the mission group, are monies that support school fees for places for kids that are determined to be especially needy by the minister of each of the conferences. That's
okay. So all right. That's very helpful for me. So where I've already committed to this one person, and I know he's needy, but I don't know if the UCCZ would consider that, him being the most needy. You know what I mean? In that kind of thing, I'd want it to go to him because he's my pen pal's son, and I have had this relationship for 10 years. So
Right.
I watched him grow up and everything. So I just feel like that's where I want the money to go. And I was just trying to find out the best way to support him and through the conference if possible. If not, I guess I have to go elsewhere. So thank you for that information. That was huge.
Yeah, which brings us to this bullet that's up on the screen right now, and that is any of us who've been to Zimbabwe have received personal appeals for money. We know that many of the pastors over there have not received any kind of salary or income for months at a time, and oftentimes they'll ask us for help. There are, and one of the warnings about personal appeals is that it unintentionally, but in actuality, creates an inequality. So that if I help this pastor because he's dear to me or because he's the pastor of my partner churches, that means that some other pastor is not receiving assistance, and that imbalance is known among the folk over there. So we urge caution about responding to personal appeals. That's not saying you can't do it, but it is saying something that's outside the covenant, and we need to be sensitive to the repercussions of those gifts.
I hear you completely. I just, as I said, I have been a pen pal with this one person,
Right,
and I just wanted to make sure that the son got the money, and the school who applied and got in is receiving the right amount of money and that sort of thing. And the only way I could do it is through the mother. And there was Reverend Mapofu just guided the mother as to what bank and how to do it and get the identification and stuff. There was no money transaction that way, but I just appreciated knowing people over there that could help me with that. But I was wondering if, as I said, if there was a way to do it through the conference, so I wouldn't be dealing with all these individuals in a sense. But he's already started, and I assume that I'll just continue to do it this way because it's the only way I know that it has worked to this point. But,
Janet, this part of our presentation today is not addressed to your particular situation. We had prepared these slides and these comments just in general.
Okay.
It has been, I think, everybody's experience that some form of appeal comes. And as they were saying, that one needs to weigh things very carefully because as he said, I don't mean to repeat him, but by giving to one and not to another, it does create disparity in Zimbabwe. And so we have chosen in the Ukama to work through the UCCZ and through our partner Ukama committee there. And they work then through the conference, 3 conference ministers, to try and determine those situations that would most benefit from our resources.
So currency and banking issues in Zimbabwe. In 2009, the currency was dollarized, and for a long time, the US dollar was the standard currency in Zimbabwe. More recently, they have started issuing these Zimbabwe bond notes, which we're not quite sure how they are valued. One of the problems that we've heard of quite frequently from our partners over there is that monies that are put in a bank as US dollars are taken out as bond notes. And in some cases, for instance, doctors are not accepting bond notes, pharmacies are not accepting bond notes. So some places in Zimbabwe are considering bond notes to be junk. So again, it's very, we take for granted that if we take $100 and put it in our bank, that if we go to the bank and say, I want $100, we'll get $20 bills. Well, that may not be the case in Zimbabwe. And so it's important to to be aware that those dilemmas are certainly are causing trouble there. It is important, and Janet, I think your story is a good example of how this is working, that you're getting an acknowledgement that the funds have been received, and that you're getting acknowledgement that the funds are being used according to your wishes. And for most people, the best way to do that is through WhatsApp, to let them know that you've sent something, whether it's hand carried, if somebody's carrying money over there, to send a WhatsApp message that says, hey, one of our friends are bringing money, please let us know when you've received it, and then give us some news about how it's being used. That kind of information just increases the level of covenant accountability that keeps the integrity of Ukama clear on both sides. So
yeah, I agree
we're
with
going to
that.
switch to the cyclone story right now and talk a little bit about what we know about that, because that's where a lot of us are really our hearts are going out. Probably most of you know that the cyclone swept across Mozambique and then into eastern Zimbabwe, where a lot of our UCCZ churches are located. It's sort of ground zero in Zimbabwe was a village called Chimanimani, where we do have a partner church. That town is probably 50 miles northeast of Chipinge area, and that also was considered to be hit. So we're receiving scattered reports from various people, WhatsApps and emails and news from Mary Johnson, that this area of the country has been fairly heavily hit. But we've also got recent news that neither the Chikore mission nor the Selinda mission has been devastated. We've got one, was that the piece of news from Reverend Ngaziori about
Yes.
the roof blown off the nurses?
Yes, I did receive an email from the administrator at Mount Selinda that was sent, or a text that was forwarded to me by Reverend Ngaziori, the president of the UCCZ, and says that 5 buildings at Mount Selinda High School were affected. Some roofing sheets were blown off. They are without electricity. There's been some damage to maize crops that were at the point of maturing, but were blown over. The School of Nursing building roof was blown off, and then he mentions also some personal family issues where a loved one was lost, and then damage to the road. So it's not devastating, but there's still a lot of work to do to recover from.
And Linda Charus, who's on this webinar before we actually officially started, was telling us that she had some information of some, basically the kind of stuff that we see around here post-hurricane, cleaning up brush and opening roads and getting bridges back open. So we know a lot of that is going on. We also know that there's been considerable loss of life in general, but except for these anecdotal things, we haven't heard specific news about particular people that, it's still rather scattered in terms of information about people in our particular churches. And we haven't gotten any news about churches being damaged up to this point.
I haven't. Earlier, Sharon Urban mentioned that a family member from one of our partner churches had been lost several members of the family. But we aren't hearing much about damage to buildings, no.
So a little bit about it. The Common Global Ministries has issued a response. And Richard, you've got some details on that, on the...
Yes, just in terms of, first of all, in terms of philosophy, our Common Global Ministries will not be the first group into a disaster. The Red Cross, the United Nations, other governmental agencies are the principal players in the immediate response to a disaster. But after the the Red Cross has wrapped up its work, and the United Nations has returned to its headquarters. Then working through our partner churches, part of the work of Common Global Ministries is to develop relationships with ecumenical agencies and other denominations, but working through these historic partnerships that United Church of Christ will determine where best to invest its funds, and will forward the funds to those agencies. So the work gets done. We tend to go in late and to stay for a long time, but to try and do our best to help with the rebuilding.
And the most recent update on the Common Global Ministries, there's a link to Common Global Ministries' response to the cyclone on the most recent conference weekly news, which speaks of partners not only in Zimbabwe, but also in Mozambique, where perhaps the damage was even more severe than in Zimbabwe. This coming Sunday is the traditional date for receiving One Great Hour of Sharing funds. Those funds cover disaster relief and long-term development around the world. They are not, specifically designated funds, but they're held in trust to be applied to the needs as they come up. Needless to say, right here in our country, we've got these huge floods in the Midwest right now. The big promotion for One Great Hour of Sharing this year has been the continual rebuilding in the wake of the hurricanes that struck Puerto Rico. And there you get the sense of what Richard was talking about how we come in late and stay long, and the work that's being done there. It's that kind of work that One Great Hour of Sharing funds will respond to. I think one of the things that we need to remind our people as we think about supporting relief efforts in the wake of the cyclone is exactly that. If you want to support rapid response, the International Red Cross is trying to do its work. The United Nations is trying to do its work. But if you want to support the kind of long-term recovery issues, One Great Hour of Sharing is a great way to go because it works directly with existing partners like the United Church of Christ of Zimbabwe, like the Mount Selinda and Shikore missions. So let's just do a quick review before we have time for questions. It's do remember that within the Ukama Partnership, there are agreed on policies and there is a covenantal relationship which really seeks to maintain this as a partner. Always, if you've got some questions about things that are related to Ukama support, check with Reverend Slater or the Ukama Mission Group, which meets more or less monthly for current information. And keep in mind that as the situation unfolds, we do have a regional gathering coming up at the United Church of Christ of Keene in May. We've scheduled 4 events. This is the first one, this webinar, but the second one is May 15th with a potluck beginning at 5:30. And the intrepid Mary Johnson, who's a great resource for bringing news, is going to be the speaker at that event, catching us up with news on the situation in Zimbabwe, not just the cyclone, but other things that are going on across the country.
Oh, that'll be rich.
We have a little bit of time for some questions and comments. Anybody have anything you'd like to ask or say about what we've presented today?
This is Bill. I just wanted to mention that I received a note from Reverend Mutsumbei, who I had connected with when we were there, and his church wasn't damaged, but the school was. They lost a number of lives there, and he's homeless. He's going to be staying, I guess, in the church for a while that all gets sorted out.
What town is that, Bill?
That is in, hold on a sec, South Down.
Okay.
Yeah, South Down. We stayed in his home. We were there in 17.
Yeah.
And the primary school that he speaks of, we visited And they have 900 students at that school. It's really a very impressive establishment for this little church in this little village. And something over 50% of their students come from Mozambique, which is very
Wow.
Yeah. Well, he said they lost two teachers, one teacher and 2 classrooms and 5 teachers' houses. And the house he was staying in was destroyed.
Wow, thank you for sharing that, Bill.
Yeah.
Other questions, comments, or news?
I'd just like to take a second to clarify something. Somebody asked me, a new pastor in the area asked me if it's true that the conference keeps 20% of all gifts given to the to partner churches. And I hope that as a result of our webinar today, you understand that the conference doesn't keep anything. We keep 0%, but 20% is kept in church-to-church gifts by the Ukama committee in Zimbabwe. 10% of that is used for other non-partnered churches for their needs, and 10% is kept for the cost of traveling around the country to monitor and to report on other projects. So, but we want to be really clear that you understand the conference doesn't keep a penny of the gifts that are sent through us.
I thought it was a very good presentation with clear direction and ideas and letting us know how the multiple ways we can assist in this process. So thank you so much for putting it together.
Yeah, I ditto that. I have a lot to bring back to Deering, who support 2 students and are always antsy about what else they could be doing. So this is really helpful. I appreciate it.
And let us be clear that the Ukama Partnership in no way discourages support of other NGOs and direct support of child sponsorship and those kinds of things. It's just that that's not within the scope of the Ukama Partnership. We know of a number of very, very worthy projects. Reverend Mutsumbe has a fantastic project that he's been doing, which he shared with us, and we're enthusiastic about it. But that's not within the purview of the Ukama Partnership as such. So it's just a way of understanding that within even the container shipments were done by the United Church of Christ of Keene, not by the Ukama Partnership, and all of the work was handled through them. Needless to say, Ukama churches were invited to participate, but it's not something for which the Ukama Partnership takes responsibility. So I hope that clarification has made sense to many of us who are connected with worthy projects over there, but that are not necessarily Ukama projects.
Right.
Yes, it's very helpful. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a good rest of your evening and have a super generous 1 great hour of sharing day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Will do.
By the way,
Planning
just
on
so you know, this has been recorded. It will. How long does it take, Ann, for it to get up on the website? About 10 days, maybe.
After I get permission, actually, it could be done quicker.
Okay, so you will be able